Marie Belcastro was a devoted school librarian. Roger Keane was the quiet janitor who worked just down the hall. No one knew he had been watching her for years, planning a crime so cold and calculated it would shock an entire town. On a quiet Monday morning in October 2016, the town of Beech Hollow, Ohio, stirred awake under gray skies and a crisp breeze. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, where front doors stayed unlocked and people trusted their routines. That's why it immediately struck people as strange when Marie Belcastro didn't show up for work. She was a 38-year-old school librarian, known for being responsible, reserved, and never missing a day without notice. Her absence wasn't just out of character, it was alarming. Marie's co-workers assumed at first that she might be sick or had car trouble. But when calls and texts to her phone went unanswered, unease began to grow. By mid-morning, the school principal contacted Marie's sister, Lena, who lived only a few blocks away. Lena drove to Marie's house expecting to find some mundane explanation. What she found instead chilled her. Marie's car was parked in the driveway right where she always left it. There were no signs of damage or forced entry. Lena knocked, no answer. The front door, unusually, was unlocked. Inside, the house was eerily silent. Nothing appeared stolen or broken. A cup of coffee sat cold on the kitchen counter. Marie's phone and keys were there too. Her handbag was tucked neatly by the coat rack, just as she always left it after returning home. It looked like she had simply vanished in the middle of her morning routine. Lena called the police. When officers arrived, they conducted a quick search of the house. In Marie's bedroom, her bed was made, and everything appeared untouched, except for one strange detail. The closet was wide open and a small suitcase was missing. Nothing else seemed out of place. Her passport, wallet, and clothes were all still there. If she had planned a trip, it didn't make sense to leave behind the essentials. If she had been taken, it had been done cleanly and quietly. As the hours passed and no word came from Marie, her disappearance evolved from a curiosity into a crisis. A missing person report was filed by sunset. Officers canvassed the neighborhood, knocking on doors and asking if anyone had seen or heard anything suspicious. Most neighbors had nothing to offer. Marie lived a quiet life, kept to herself, and didn't socialize much outside work or family. Then one man mentioned something unusual. He'd been up early for work around 4 a.m. and saw a dark blue pickup truck idling across the street from Marie's house. It had struck him as odd, because that spot was rarely used, especially at that hour. He hadn't seen who was inside the vehicle, and it drove off before he left for work. The police took note of the detail, but it was too vague to act on. As the investigation began, the town of Beech Hollow was gripped by fear and confusion. No one could understand how someone as predictable and private as Marie could disappear without a trace. There was no struggle, no break-in, and no goodbye. Just silence, a cold cup of coffee, and a mystery that would grow darker with every passing day. As the investigation deepened, police began looking beyond the surface of Marie Belcastro's life. From the outside, she seemed like someone with few complications, dedicated to her job, close to her sister, and living a quiet life in a modest, two-bedroom home. But investigators knew that people often hide entire worlds behind their daily routines. They started with her digital footprint, emails, social media, and text messages. That's when they discovered something that shifted the tone of the case. Just weeks before her disappearance, Marie had been in contact with someone from her past, a man named Derek Connors. He had been her boyfriend over 15 years ago, during her final year at college. Their relationship had ended abruptly, and Marie had never spoken about it much. She had never dated seriously after that, and some of her friends believed the breakup had affected her deeply. Derek's sudden reappearance in her life was unexpected and suspicious. Their Facebook messages started off casual, with Derek saying he had seen her profile and wanted to reconnect. He said he was sorry for how things ended. Marie was polite, but distant. As the conversation went on over a few days, Derek began to push for a face-to-face meeting. Marie declined more than once. She said she was busy, uninterested in revisiting the past, but Derek persisted. His tone shifted slightly, still friendly on the surface but with a sense of urgency underneath. Investigators found no evidence that she had agreed to meet him in person. However, The timing of the messages made it impossible to ignore. Derek had last messaged her 2 nights before she went missing. When questioned, Derek admitted to contacting her but insisted he never saw her in person. He claimed he was just reaching out for closure, not trying to stir anything up. He said he spent the night Marie disappeared watching movies alone in his trailer, but no one could confirm his alibi. Derek lived about 30 miles from Beech Hollow, in a small cluttered trailer near a stretch of empty farmland. He had a history of minor criminal charges, mostly bar fights and noise complaints, but also one domestic violence charge from several years back. That charge had been dismissed when the woman chose not to testify. He wasn't a stranger to her. Police, but nothing connected him directly to Marie's disappearance. As suspicions around Derek mounted, police continued to search for any physical evidence linking him to the crime. They examined Marie's home again, this time with cadaver dogs. The dogs reacted to an area in her backyard garden, prompting officers to dig, hoping for answers, but they found nothing. The lead fizzled, and frustration began to build. The town grew quieter. The posters with Marie's face began to fade. People still spoke her name, but mostly in hushed tones. Marie's family clung to hope, but with no body and no proof of foul play, the case stalled. The only thing investigators had was a vague sighting of a truck, an uneasy ex-boyfriend, and a growing sense that something much darker was hiding beneath the surface. 6 months passed with no answers. The case of Marie Belcastro had grown cold, no new leads had surfaced, and the public's attention had shifted elsewhere. Her disappearance remained a haunting mystery in Beech Hollow, an open wound with no closure. Then, in the early spring of 2017, a shocking discovery changed everything. A group of teenagers had been exploring an abandoned rock quarry located about 15 miles outside of town. The area had long been a local hangout for kids, secluded, silent, and forgotten by most adults. The teens had been climbing the crumbling limestone walls when they noticed a strange plastic sheet partially buried beneath a pile of rocks. It looked out of place, unnaturally smooth against the rugged terrain. Curious, they peeled it back, and what they found made them run for help in terror. Inside the plastic was a body, badly decomposed but still recognizable. The remains were wrapped in a thick tarp, bound with rope and partially hidden under boulders. It had clearly been placed there intentionally, hidden with care. When authorities arrived, they secured the scene and quickly began the process of identification. Within days, dental records confirmed what many had feared. The body was Marie Belcastro. An autopsy revealed the cause of death to be manual strangulation. There were no defensive wounds, which suggested she had either been ambushed or didn't see the attack coming. Toxicology came back clean, no drugs or sedatives in her system. The medical examiner noted that the state of her body indicated she had been kept in cold storage for a period before being dumped at the quarry. That detail disturbed investigators. It meant someone had taken steps to preserve the body before disposal. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was premeditated and controlled. With the discovery of her body, the case was officially upgraded to a homicide investigation. Police refocused their efforts, now knowing for certain that Marie hadn't left of her own will. She had been murdered. The question was, who had done it and why? Detectives revisited all the individuals who had once been questioned, especially Derek Connors. His alibi had been shaky from the beginning, and now the pressure was on. Yet despite renewed scrutiny, no physical evidence connected him to the quarry or to the tarp that had been used to wrap Marie's body. There were no fingerprints, no fibers, and no trace of her ever being in his trailer. Then a small breakthrough came. At the quarry site, investigators found tire impressions in the soft earth near the dumping area. The tracks were faint but clear enough to analyze. After careful examination, they were matched to a rare set of tires only manufactured for a limited edition 1998 pickup truck. Less than a dozen of those vehicles were registered in the surrounding counties. It was a small detail, but it was a start. One by one, owners of that model were tracked down and questioned. Most were cleared easily. Only one name stood out: Roger Keane, a quiet janitor who worked at the same school where Marie had been the librarian. He drove the right truck. He lived alone and nobody had ever really paid attention to him until now. Roger Keane had worked at Beech Hollow Elementary for over 12 years. He was the kind of person most people overlooked, always present, always polite, but never quite noticed. Described by colleagues as quiet and dependable, Roger kept to himself and rarely engaged in conversation beyond the necessities of his job. He cleaned classrooms, fixed leaky faucets, and unlocked the building each morning before dawn. No one ever suspected him of anything unusual. But as investigators began to examine him more closely, his quiet nature started to take on a more unsettling tone. The first connection was his truck. It matched the make, model, and tire pattern found at the quarry. Investigators obtained a warrant to search his property. What they found would unravel the case in ways no one had anticipated. Inside his small, cluttered home, buried in a drawer beneath old receipts and faded tools, was a weathered notebook. At first glance, it appeared unremarkable, just pages of scrawled handwriting. But as detectives flipped through it, the contents chilled them. The notebook was filled with detailed notes about Marie Belcastro's daily routines. It included dates, times, and observations of her activities, when she left for work, when she returned, what groceries she bought, and even what time her lights went off at night. There were notes going back years. Investigators realized that Roger had been watching Marie obsessively. He had tracked her movements in secret while continuing to work quietly at her place of employment. There was no indication that Marie ever knew she was being watched. She had never reported feeling unsafe or seeing anyone suspicious. Roger had kept his distance, never interacting with her more than necessary. But the evidence suggested he had developed a fixation that had grown darker over time. In his basement, officers discovered more disturbing clues. A freezer, scrubbed clean, had once contained items now missing. Forensic analysis found faint traces of human blood around its edges. Though degraded, DNA confirmed it belonged to Marie. That finding, combined with the notebook and the matching truck tires, gave authorities enough to make an arrest. Roger was taken into custody without resistance. During interrogation, he, at die, first denied everything. But when presented with the evidence, the notes, the blood, the forensic ties to the quarry, he became quiet. Then slowly he confessed. He said he had watched Marie for years, developing what he described as a connection that she never knew existed. When Derek Connors re-entered her life, Roger felt threatened. He believed he was about to lose her, even though she had never been his. In his distorted mind, her refusal to see Derek wasn't enough. He wanted control. And so, one early morning, he entered her home through the back door, unlocked just like every other day, and confronted her. When she panicked, he strangled her. He then wrapped her body, stored it in his freezer, and waited until he found a quiet place to dispose of it. The man who had cleaned the hallways of her school for over a decade, who walked the same corridors, as she did every day, had been hiding a monstrous obsession. No one had ever suspected a thing. He had simply waited, watched, and eventually acted. Roger Keane's confession brought a wave of relief and horror to the town of Beech Hollow. The mystery surrounding Marie Belcastro's disappearance had finally been solved, but the truth was more disturbing than anyone had imagined. A man they had all overlooked, a quiet fixture in their everyday lives, had been carrying a secret obsession that ended in a cold-blooded murder. With the evidence mounting and his own words sealing his fate, Roger was charged with first-degree murder, abuse of a corpse, and unlawful concealment of human remains. The trial moved quickly. Prosecutors presented the notebook, the blood evidence, from the freezer, the matching tire tracks, and his confession. The defense attempted to argue diminished capacity, citing signs of isolation and mental instability, but the jury was unconvinced. Roger had methodically planned Marie's murder and taken calculated steps to cover it up. His actions were not impulsive. They were deliberate and controlled. It took just 3 hours of deliberation for the jury to return a guilty verdict. Roger Keane was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Marie's family sat through every moment of the trial. They listened to the details of how she had been stalked, watched, and eventually murdered by a man she barely knew. Her sister Lena later said that the most painful part was knowing how close Marie had come to safety, how she had been right there in her own home, just steps away from calling for help, but had never even known she was in danger. In the pur. Weeks after the sentencing, Beech Hollow struggled to come to terms with what had happened. Parents spoke nervously about the fact that a murderer had worked at their children's school. Staff members wrestled with guilt, wondering if there had been signs they had missed. The library where Marie had worked remained closed for several days as teachers and students mourned her loss. A small memorial was created at the front of the school, with candles, flowers, and photographs of Marie placed under a plaque that read, "In memory of a life taken too soon." But the final twist came months later, when detectives were processing items from a storage unit Roger had rented under a different name. Inside, they found a second notebook. This one was older and more fragmented, but equally disturbing. It contained names, addresses, and routines of 3 other women. 2 were from nearby towns. 1 had moved out of state. None of them had ever reported feeling watched or followed. When contacted, the women were shaken. They had no idea who Roger was. Investigators believe these notebooks were the beginnings of future plans. Whether Roger would have acted on them, no one can say for sure. But it was clear that Marie was not the first person he had fixated on, just the first he chose to harm. Her death may have prevented others. Marie Belcastro's story remains a stark reminder that danger doesn't always come loudly or with warning. Sometimes it hides in plain sight, behind familiar faces and quiet routines. And when it finally reveals itself, the consequences can be devastating.